Dumela, Sawubona, Sakpase, Namaste, Upshin, Dubra Ota, Assalamu alaikum, Hotep, Buenos dias, bonjour, good day. What's going on, folks? My name is Doriel Anez Larrier of Larry's Education and Resource Network, where I plant seeds to help you grow. And we are here at season 2, episode 20, no, 26 of the Doria Laria Show. And, here we have inspirational leaders who inform, impact, and influence people to live life better than the day before. Today, we have a very interesting guest. This is a little bit of step into history, a step back into history, and I look forward to having you join us. As you come in, as you always do, please do 2 things for me. Please like and subscribe, especially to us on Facebook and on YouTube, as well as share this out to some people. Now, I have on our show today the co-founder, one of the founders of the Museum of African American History in the state of Iowa. Yes, you saw me do this video and this tour of this museum a few weeks ago. And if you did not, I'll link it below after the show is over and you can take a look. But I was able, after this tour that I did, to actually meet one of the founders. It wasn't even planned, but it happened. And so I got the person to chat with right here on our show. And that is Brother Thomas Moore.
Hi.
Hey, good afternoon, Brother Moore. Good afternoon. It's so good to have you. So good to have you here. How are you?
Glad to be here.
Excellent. All right. So those people who know Brother Thomas Moore, you are a part of a number of communities. So I do hope and pray that those people who know you will share this out and invite other people to come on in, because this is a conversation that is always needed to be had. What we're doing here, why it is so necessary to have a museum, and how it is so pivotal in the town and in the state that you live in. So why don't you give us a little bit of background of who you are, your role in this museum, and why it was so important?
I am so sorry.
Not a problem.
My phone rang. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can. I can hear you.
Okay, I can't hear you. But the museum was an idea that came out of our church, Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church. In 1993, we had acquired this building, and I was working with the youth, and I was concerned about their lack of knowledge of African American history. As you know, in many schools, it's not taught. And I went to school in one of those schools where it wasn't taught. And I didn't want our children to grow up as ignorant of our history as I felt like I was. And so I had asked the pastor if I could establish some area of the building for history for our youth. And my friend Thomas Levi, he was very concerned about the children's self-esteem, especially the girls. So it grew out of that. We thought we would establish a youth center in that building. As we looked at it, the building was not habitable. It wasn't worth fixing up, and we would have to share the parking lot. And so we'd done a number of drawings to see what it would look like, and it didn't work. So we didn't give up on the idea. We had met the very first time, and I had called this committee together. And one of those who came, we were talking a lot about our children knowing African American history and what we needed to have to show them. And one of our members said, "Well, sounds to me like you guys want to make a museum, build a museum." And I said, and a light bulb came on, and everyone, not everyone, but I should say my friend and I, Thomas Levi's head, and we talked the rest of the group into it. So we began that way, and the church was our first seed money, supplied us with the first seed money in a location where we could use as our office. And so that was very important, because you have to have some location that you're operating out of. And so we started in that way, very small, as a concept, as an idea. We spent 2 years just trying to decide who we were as an organization and what we were going to do, and then how we were going to do it. We were 5 years into it, and we had many committees that were really active, but I could tell that people were getting burned out, and we were raising very little money. It seemed like every step forward was two backwards. And so finally, I said to the group, we have got to get help, a professional person. And so we began that process, found a young man in South Carolina who was willing to come up, Joseph McGill. I'm still in touch with him after all these years. He came up, and he had museum background, and we really became much more professional, much more impressive under Joe's leadership. Joe had never built a museum, and he really had never managed a museum. He was a program person at a museum. And so he brought us lots of programs that we could do. And we were located at West Del Mall after we had contacted a number of successful business men. We asked them, what would you do if you were in our shoes to get this thing going? And they said, well, no one's heard of you. No one's seen you. We certainly haven't. We have noticed that there are several museums that are operating out of malls, shopping malls. And so they recommended we do that. And so we acquired a vacant restaurant spot in West Del Mall, and we converted it. We had meeting rooms in the back in our offices, and we had an exhibit, and we had a store. So I always say we could practice being a museum while we were there, even though we didn't have a building. But we were continuing to raise funds, and we brought enough in to launch the building. We didn't get started on the building until I think it was 2002, early 2002, and had raised most of the money for the building, but nothing for the exhibit. As you probably know, the exhibit is almost as expensive as the building, especially if you're going to do it with professional exhibitors. And so we were able to move in and set up offices. The building wasn't done, but our lease ran out in 2003. And so January 2003, we moved in with the offices upstairs, and all the rest was still being worked on. And my friend Joseph McGill announced that his wife was tired of Iowa's cold weather. They were going back to South Carolina, which they did. And I soon became the interim director. I had retired a couple of weeks before and had announced to Joe that I'd be coming down to help him and do some things several times a week, which was the same time he announced to me that he was leaving. And so I became I had a weekend off in my retirement, but I retired from Quaker Oats, is where I worked as an accounting manager. And I retired from there, but I didn't retire from work. I had gotten burned out, so I still wanted to work. And so I volunteered to be the interim director, and I served in that capacity and saw the building finished. Joe left before it was finished. He was a huge part of us being able to do the museum. And so we named the administrative offices after Joe, and really have been very, very grateful to him. So we finished the building shortly after he left, and then we focused on an exhibit. And we knew some folks who were in that business that did a number of historical or history museums in town. And I didn't mention we are a history museum, um, to distinguish between art and natural history.
Right. And
But
can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I am, my audio doesn't seem to be working. And Doriel is telling me something. Sorry.
Okay. Hold on. Hold on.
And so we met with these people, and they gave us an idea of how much money we were going to need in addition to what we had, which was very little. And so then we started fundraising for an exhibit as well. And Joseph had an interesting approach. He had pulled together a number of people out of the community that he thought would serve as a group of people to give us our storyline. And some were from out of, they were from all around the state. It so happens that there were a number of authors working on a book that was Iowa's African American history, called Outside In. And so much of our exhibit, and even today, is based on that book. There were about 17 authors, and several of them are still with us, alive. Um, the majority of them were African Americans out of the Des Moines area, but there were a number of other professors, doctors that were Caucasian that also were involved in that project. And so we did have a basis for the story that we wanted to tell. The group was not sure if they wanted to start in Africa or if they wanted to start our storyline after slavery. One was very, very adamant that she was embarrassed by slavery. And we didn't listen to her, primarily because you can't tell the rest of the story without having the background to how you got there. And this is an emphasis that I give to several of the touring groups that I've done, is that we will continue to remember where we came from and how we got to where we are, because our children and the other children who are not African American, they need that story to really understand all of the unrest, the Black Lives Matter movement, and all of the civil rights that are continuing to go on, which are still very much needed, as much as they were during the 50s, that I remember well, my father being part of the NAACP. And so we decided we would go with Africa. And so we put up the exhibit, and we opened up shortly after that. And I didn't know if you needed an additional information on the history. We were operating as a museum primarily to the school systems all around the Iowa, mainly Lynn County, but we had some that were coming out of Des Moines and other counties, which we hadn't counted on. We had put our exhibit together because we wanted to. We thought our audience was going to be interested adults, and not just African American adults. Well, we do have a number of interested people, and probably, as your audience knows, Iowa's African American population is very, very small. So we could not have done the exhibit or the museum or have visitors and a membership without having a tremendous amount of white support, which we have always gotten in our area. And I have to be honest with you, it's been a wonderful surprise to me I grew up the hard way, uh, being told that you need to stay in your place and smile a lot and this type of thing in order to get along. And so uh, it was a very pleasant surprise. I have so many relationships now with those that have supported us over the years that aren't African Americans that are wonderful, wonderful people. But we soon found out that we needed an educator and not just someone to do tours because the amount of busloads of children that were coming to the museum was so surprising. And so we did a changing exhibit right away because the changing exhibit gallery was wide open. We didn't have anything there. And we engaged children all over the state to take pictures of various aspects, primarily of African American businesses, churches, and get some idea of their community in pictures. And so we issued a lot of little cameras to a lot of different children throughout the state. And so that was our first exhibit. We put all these photos up, and all their parents came to see them and their families. And we were just delighted at the turnout that we had. And of course, the word got out, and we've been seeing lots of children ever since. And so it's worked out to be a great thing for us. Um, we paid off our mortgage on our exhibit. We had already paid the building off. Um, in 2008, April of 2008, and in June 2008, it flooded, and we had everything except for a few items that we had put up and out of the way gone. So we were back in debt right away overnight. And again, the community just responded, and we got donations from across the state. We got city money and state money, and we were able to redo the exhibit the way we really needed it done to accommodate classes of children. And that's what you see in there today. We have places for the children to sit in the middle of an exhibit, and the instructor can say, over here is this, and over there is that, and then they move to another spot. And then so it was, we had hired an educator, and they still have an educator to do this. In fact, we had 1.5 people. We were so busy. And during this time, we also developed a lot of traveling exhibits because we are a statewide museum. So the museum has board members from across the state, and we're very proud of that. Plus, we have traveling exhibits that we can put in libraries and churches and businesses. And so places like Pioneer, who was very Pioneer Seed, whose founder was very close to George Washington Carver when he was at ISU. In fact, his son was even closer and had ran for vice president.
ISU is
And
University.
So they were very close to Carver. And so they had already done quite a bit in their facility. They're located in Des Moines as well as Quad Cities and down south. They have an area dedicated to George Washington Carver because they learned so much in growing corn. Most people think of peanuts, and by the way, he did not invent peanut butter, which most people want to give him credit for. And he never became a doctor. He earned a master's degree, and many want to call him doctor. He never had that bestowed upon him honorarily either. But so companies like that really dug in deep and helped us to redo our exhibit. And we have a real nice exhibit on him, on Carver, that was sponsored by the Pioneer Seed Company.
Hold on. Okay, can you hear me now?
I'm sorry, Dario. I am not getting sound for
Oh,
some reason.
hold on. Okay, folks. So this is what usually happens. Not usually happens. If this is an amazing conversation, for those of you who are still here, please just stay. He's going to pop right back in. If you are going to do a live stream, make sure that you take your phone and you put your sound or you put your phone on airplane mode. If you're going to be recording from your phone or streaming from your phone, any phone call that comes through, hi, how are you? It's going to actually knock out the sound. So you can hear, I know you can hear him. Thank you so much, but I couldn't hear him. So he's going to come back on. So those of you who are just, who have been here, thank you so much for joining us. This is a conversation with the co-founder, Brother Thomas Moore of the African American Museum in Iowa. I had the blessed opportunity to go visit Iowa a few weeks ago at the end of June. And while there, my uncle Andrew, shout out to Uncle Andrew, thank you so much. He said, make sure that you go and visit. And I said, there's a museum of African American history in Iowa? And he goes, yes, so you have to go visit. So that's what I did on my Facebook page. It is there. And so while I was there, I did this entire tour. And then at the end of the tour, I came back to my family's house for a celebration. And who's sitting right next to me at the dinner table? But Thomas Moore. And we just got into a conversation. I said, oh, yeah, I was at the museum. He goes, really? I'm one of the co-founders. I said, no way. Really? And so that's how this conversation started. And so he started telling me the story. And as I do, when people start giving me amazing information that I think everyone needs to hear, I say, wait, hold on. Let's push the live button together. And so I said, would you mind popping on to my show? And so he said, sure. So those of you who are here and you know Brother Thomas Moore, please drop a comment, whether you're listening or watching on Facebook or YouTube, and I'll be able to bring your comment up. If you have any questions, drop the questions and bring them up as well. So of course, at the time that we are at now, he was just saying that George Washington Carver, who was at ISU, and you heard me pop in and sort of do a voiceover. ISU, of course, for those of you who do not know, is Iowa State University. And there is an exhibit of George Washington Carver, and he clarified two things. He never received his formal doctorate. So when people say Dr. Carver, it's actually a misstatement. Number two, he did not, quote unquote, found or discover peanut butter. Most of the beginnings of his work was in working with corn, because if you don't already know, Iowa is known for corn. So when he pops back, we will be sure to see and hear him. Here he goes. Here he goes. Hi.
Yeah. Sorry, I received a call and it knocked you out.
You can hear me now?
I can hear you.
Wonderful. Excellent. Excellent. So I just gave like a little commercial and just sort of updated people, those who are here. And we have a number of people who are watching. So it's fabulous. So I did a lot of listening, which is kind of difficult, but I did it. And
so proud of you.
Right. I know of the amazing background that you gave as how the idea for the museum got started, how thanks to your church, Mount Zion, how it helped to provide the seed money, the people who helped with the development from the idea to opening the doors, the flood. I cannot believe right after you burn the mortgage, you have a flood and it destroys everything. And then you're back to trying to start over. So a question I want to ask is, you just dropped a bomb on people and said that George Washington Carver did not, quote unquote discover peanut butter, that his initial work was actually in corn. So if you can sort of clarify that, because literally you're just changing the history books. Every single teacher has said George Washington Carver, like, of course, like invented peanut butter. So give us the
Yeah,
real tea on
I
that.
think if I'm correct, I think peanut butter was originally done in Egypt, and they had a form of peanut butter. But George Washington Carver, he did do over 200 uses of peanuts. One of the things that so many that he doesn't get credit for today was the fact that he created an economy for growing peanuts and soybeans.
Yes, yes.
Uh, the peanuts and soybeans. Soybeans were really planted as a feed for livestock and was not really commercialized. He enabled, and he's considered the father of biochemical engineering, and they used to call it chemergy, I think is what the term they used to call it during his time. And George Washington Carver, he came to Iowa after being turned down at Highland College in Kansas. And he had heard about Simpson College. Now, believe it or not, he was probably not the first African American to attend Simpson. Simpson had started out a very diverse college and has since been been criticized extensively for not being diverse today, and so they went backwards. But he started out on an art major because he loved art. He was very sick as a youth, so he spent a lot of time inside and he learned how to crochet and do a lot of things that were thought for women. And so in all of his life, he would do that as a hobby. He would knit and crochet, and we had some of his doilies on exhibit, in fact.
So wait, so then in essence, George Washington Carver would today be considered a Renaissance man.
Yeah, yes.
Sciences and strong in arts and letters. So actually, I did not know that. Of course, I did not know that he was a handcraft artist, right? I did not know that.
He won an art in an art show in Chicago, and I was going to tell you about that. But yeah, he was an artist, quite an artist, and he well, let me get him to ISU because he was at Simpson, and one of the people there said, "My husband works at," because he showed a strong interest in growing things. And they thought, well, if you had an education in agriculture, we think it would serve you much better than art, not to discourage you from being an artist. And so he was accepted at Iowa College, Iowa Agricultural College, now Iowa State. And
1 second, Brother Moore. Let me just drop this information. Anyone who is watching this, if you hear any nuggets of information that you did not know or you think someone should know, type it in the comments. I'm going to be muting myself so I can type as best as possible, but I need my stream team. Anybody who gets all of these great pieces of information, like I literally just looked up Simpson College, found out information about it. So I'm going to try to add as much to the stream. But keep talking. I'm going to take notes. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, he was the first African American accepted at ISU, what's now called ISU, and if you don't mind, I'll refer to it as what it's called now. But he still was although he was accepted as a student, he was treated as in a segregated manner. So they had to fix him up a special place in near the janitor's quarters, and so he had a room there. And they were really, really hesitant, but they felt like he had such a strong interest. Well, he wasn't there very long before he became very popular with the other students, and so he took in laundry to earn money. That was one of the things he learned to do, and because he needed money for he didn't get a full ride scholarship, so he needed money to go there. And so he also did a lot of art in addition to his courses. Well, he earned his bachelor's degree in that manner. He did not have many clothes or much in the way of clothes. And the students there talked him into entering an art contest out of Chicago, an art show, and which he did. And he had a number of pieces that we had some of his art in an exhibit also. You won't see it there now, but he actually, I think he took maybe second or third place in, I think it was watercolors. And the students there liked him so well that they bought him a suit and paid for his way to get over there. And so, he was such a likable person. And he soon earned his master's degree there, which Iowa is very proud of. And then he became the first
And they should be.
and very first professor there. During those early years, he developed a very strong relationship with the son of pioneers. Wallace was their last name, and he served, I believe, Wallace served as a vice president or ran for that, and they never lost contact. He said Carver was his inspiration, and as you know, they grow a lot of seed corn, and it's planted all over. But during those years, Carver worked in the lab, and he taught students. He learned the ways of planting properly. He was on the cutting edge of learning the techniques for growing crops. For growing crops. And so word got out about him, and Booker T. Washington learned about him, and didn't have a hard time talking him into going down to helping recently freed Black men to learn cutting edge agricultural processes to grow. And that's where he spent the rest of his career. I think he was at Iowa State for maybe 2.5 years as an instructor. And after he went down there, he found that Booker T. Washington was not really prepared to pay him, was not prepared to give him a lab. And so ISU provided him with microscopes and beakers and all sorts of things, even after he left Iowa State. And it was very, very gratifying to learn all of this that took place in his life. And so, excuse me a bit, I get a little emotional sometimes when I think about all of the things that he did and the way that things turned out for him. While at Tuskegee, and I digress because I'm talking about his career, but such a wonderful career. He became known for cutting edge biochemical uses and commercial uses of soybeans, as well as peanuts. And the reason I mentioned that is the Soybean Association in Iowa was very strongly dedicated to him because he was the forerunner of their organization, forerunner of agricultural commercial uses of agricultural products. In the meantime, Henry Ford had contacted him, and they were working on the ethanol. And he was very much against using oil. Very strong about the environment, and so he was very much against anything that wasn't biochemical, that wasn't degradable. And believe it or not, Henry Ford was also. And together they came up with a car body. I'm talking about a car body made out of soybeans. And
A car made out of soybeans?
the body of it was made. And you'd be surprised at the products that have soybeans based, that are yarn and thread and all sorts of products today. But they were way ahead of their time, and it just didn't fly. The gasoline was much more expensive than the petroleum based, which it is today also. You have to be very interested in the environment in order to invest into ethanol. And so in order for it to be marketable, the nation, as federal government, has to subsidize it quite a bit. So he was way ahead of his time there. And he came to do lectures all over the United States on agriculture, as well as all of the African Americans that were recently freed, teaching them agricultural processes and how to benefit. And so he was very instrumental during the time of the boll weevil that was decimating the South and the cotton products. So not only was the boll weevil decimating it, but also they were taking all the nutrients out of the soil. So he did nothing about the boll weevil, but he did a lot to teach them to plant peanuts in alternatively, or to alternate with the years that they grow cotton. Well, they didn't want to do that because peanuts sold for peanuts. And so they could see no reason to do that. So they had to have an economical reason. Money talks. And so he had to go and invent all of the products he did for commercial use. He never took out a patent on any of it. It was made free to everyone. The few products that he did that he had an interest in didn't fly. It's a funny type situation. But so he had to invent a market for peanuts, which he did. And so in their off season, when they grew peanuts, they had a market to sell them in, and they still have a market today. Not as peanuts that you and I buy, which is one of the markets, but all of the other markets that peanut oil is used in, whether it's mayonnaise and cooking oil, and just a number of products that he developed and invented, and companies today get the use of. And that, as well as soybeans. And he also did a lot with sweet potatoes that people don't recognize because it's not talked much. But anyway, we were very proud to have him as a part of Iowa's history. And we have part of our permanent exhibit dedicated to talking about his work, primarily in Iowa, although we do make it known that the majority of his lifetime was spent at Tuskegee.
I feel like I have just had 3 lectures that I was supposed to have while I was in college.
Me too.
This is incredible. I'm actually adding to the stream for those. Sweet potatoes was another part of his, I want to say, what's the best way to say that? Of his marketing.
His repertoire.
That sweet potatoes was another part of his
agricultural development.
There we go.
I'm just guessing.
That's beautiful. It worked. And I'm doing this because, again, some people will listen and some people will read. And I'm looking for my stream team. My stream team, where are you? Come on, like, help me type this out. Agricultural. I know I'm spelling it wrong.
Development.
Development. There we go.
Ag development.
That'll work. Sweet potatoes. Sweet potato was. There we go. Singular was. Beautiful.
Please don't ask me what he made with the sweet potato, but he did find a number of uses for that too.
That's okay. So that will actually just be an assignment for someone who understands the assignment. Go find out what he did with the sweet potatoes. So, so this literally now the part of the exhibit of your exhibit of the museum where George Washington Carver is part and parcel to is actually just one piece. So there are, I think, two other aspects of the museum that if you feel like you can give more fodder to, that would be great. And that is, thank you so much for, and this is when our sound was a little askew, for standing firm on the museum's focus of origin, whether you start with the African origins or you start with when we, according to some history books, when we arrived at these shores. So thank you for, saying, no, we need to talk about where we've come from so we can, of course, understand where we are today. So I thank you for doing that. I did see that in, I believe it was as soon as I walked in the door, and I guess I bared to the right.
To the right, yes.
And I started around.
On that basis, we still continue to have many relationships with Nigerians, people from Ghana, all over, Togo, Chad. We have a number of those presenting, and also musical groups. So it's just been a wonderful experience to do Africa and to exhibit it. When they see it, they really appreciate it, because we were working with a group that were Rwanda. They were out of Rwanda, and they wanted to start an African museum. And so it never really developed. We worked with them, and I helped them develop a plan and this type of thing. So Africa has been very, very important for the museum in many ways. In fact, we did a full-blown traveling exhibit, and still do it, on different parts of Africa, making sure people understand it's a continent, not a country. And there's a lot of diversity within that continent.
Precisely. And I did see, as a matter of, so what caught my eye is when I started to bear to the right and I see the sign that lets me know, because sometimes in museums, if you don't read the brochure when they give it to you at the door, you don't read the map, and you walk into things, you're just like, wait a minute, what is that? And so I see the, I guess, let's say the sign above the door, if you will, that says you're about to go into this part of the exhibit. And so, but before that really stuck in my head, I went around the corner and I see this huge structure, or this huge figure, right? That was, it was probably like a priest,
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Oh, hi.
Ungungun.
Egungun.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I see the big the hat or the hooded part, and then I see the big booba, the dress, and then I see the legs, and it has the the shake-a-days or the bells around the ankles. And because it's such a towering figure, I was like, wait a minute, I wasn't expecting that.
And that was the outfit was donated by a professor from ISU who did a number of studies on Africa. And she did it a lot on fabric, and she taught some of that at ISU.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful to know that there are people who are, whether they be local, let's say national or international, because you spoke about a connection with Rwanda and other countries, and how they wanted to just feed into, and as we would say in the church world, love on you, and just sort of help out and to share the information and share the work. So that is phenomenal. So of course, then I walk in and I see let's say the representation, right? The representation of the close quarters, right?
Oh, yes.
Right, the underbelly of the ship, which, and this is a question that I have, and I'm really glad that you talked about having museum educators or educators to sort of help probably with the museum prep work, like before you bring a class, before you bring a group of students, to try to really emotionally prepare people. I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine who brought a group of students to the Blacks in Wax Museum in the DMV area. And she said, listen, if you ever want to do that, you got to prepare people. And I said, well, you know about this. I'm surprised you didn't, the way that you didn't prepare them. That was pretty interesting. But no one is really, really prepared to see those images. And so I'm in New York because of the amount of museums that we have and the inundation of culture, and I'm use that loosely, that image is a little more not manageable. It's never manageable, but we just see more essences of it. So I was wondering, like, how do you prepare people who are from like middle America, who, like you said, the amount of Black people in Iowa already is very small. How do you prepare somebody for that? Like, what did you have to do? What kind of trauma did people go through? Like looking at that saying, oh, because you said that some people were embarrassed about the part of African history that has to do with the enslavement of African people, whereby they said we don't want to start with Africans in Africa. Let's start with African Americans here. So I just wanted to know, like, what was the initial response, or how did you have to soften the blow, if you will? That part of the exhibit.
Well, we lead people through the door of no return, which is a representation of Goree Island,
right?
And coming out of the castle there and onto a slave ship. So we do very little preparation for it. We talk about Africa, and we don't really talk so much about the enslavement of other Africans in Africa, which is still going on today, as we know. When there's a war going on between various groups, the group that loses becomes slaves to those who win, and so slavery is not new. It's sure a dark part of our history, but in fact, we had a Nigerian professor to actually come and apologize. He was very in his presentation, because he said, in Africa, slavery is different than it was in the United States. We didn't work people to death. They lived in our house with us, and they did serve, but we didn't kill them. We didn't brutalize them, so it was a different thing. But we don't usually talk too much about that in the Africa section. At least I don't. It's interesting that you bring that up, because I just had a tour this past weekend with a group of adults from a church in Des Moines, a couple of churches. They came over, and one of the questions that one of them had was, well, what's the response when you bring children through? Because I was telling them, we have a little platform there, and it allows us to put the whole class on that little platform.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to give them a feel of just how little space each individual on that ship had.
Right.
They had none, and they had no privacy whatsoever. They used the restroom there. They slept there. They ate there, whatever they had to eat. And so the response that we get, both from children and adults, some are just very saddened. We've had people actually to cry. And these are white people for the most part going through. I think we already had some idea. African Americans had some idea.
But that's because we grew up, I'm of the age, we grew up on what show? Roots.
Yeah.
We grew up on Roots, and if you didn't grow up on Roots, you grew up on some derivation of Roots that came down the line. So, if you're a part of at least the 40 plus club or 50 plus club, then you most likely had that as your background. So if for nothing else, yeah. But because we are African American, and I'm saying this loosely, most of our households back in the day, that was what you watched. It was part of like your home education. Now,
Absolutely.
if you're part of other communities, you had a choice. We didn't have a choice.
Yeah, we didn't have a choice.
We didn't have a choice. Just to be reminded.
Yeah,
So,
so yeah,
so
we do very little preparation for people coming in, and we get some really strange reactions. It angers some, and I'm talking primarily white people that this occurred. And we also have a few people to actually look at us and say, "I'm sorry that that happened." Um, and we don't throw it in their face, this type of thing. These were their ancestors. They had nothing to do with what their ancestors did, but just as I didn't. However, now they have a chance to live out a different life, a different
there you
approach
go.
to things, and that's the
Thank
whole idea. They brought up the fact that there's laws and bills in legislature now that bans teaching these things because they want all a favorable impression of the history of the United States and want the children to see nothing of the hardships and the darkness of our history. And I totally agreed. I said, well, we have to fight hard in order to maintain that because right now there is a real movement uh, to take that out of the libraries, out of the schools. As you can see, the sun is coming onto my side of the house. Excuse me a minute while I change my shade to get the sun out of my glasses there.
No problem. No problem. We'll have a little commercial break. Thank you, those people who are still here watching. I really appreciate you. So, we are having this amazing conversation about the African American History Museum in Iowa. There is one. I'm really proud to have been able again to go to visit. And then again, after my tour, just happened to have dinner and I'm sitting next to the co-founder. It was just God sent. So, this is a follow-up conversation from that. So right now, of course, we're just sort of chatting about, what happens when people see that part of the exhibit. And so I'm glad that it starts with a part of the beginning. I'm glad that it starts with a part of the beginning. I'm glad that you had people to support your effort in order to build out that part of the exhibit. And so we move from there, and I know another part that sticks out that I wanted to focus on, and then we'll hop into the counter part of the exhibit, and that is the role of the Black church. And so I remember seeing some of the first, not the first images or the images of the first churches, but the role of the Black church in the development of community, and that was very, very, very heartwarming to see, and then so it was like migration from the South to the North, settling in communities where people lived, the churches that they worshiped at. And then we move into sort of like the civil rights, which was the lunch counter. And I think that was also a beautiful exhibit that I wanted to spend a minute on. Can you tell me about maybe a moment about the role of churches in Cedar Rapids? And then moving into like the civil rights piece.
Yes, if we talk about the church in Cedar Rapids, we're also basically talking about the church in Iowa. And even today, our churches are a big part of our community. But as you know, I mean, New York is no different. The the church has been huge in our history. Um, it's not as huge today. Uh, we have opened so many other avenues, but the in our history, it brought a sense of pride. It was also a way to socialize in a manner that was not, um, you weren't going to get shot or cut or whatever. as you would maybe in a bar or somewhere. So Black people congregated. It also, most congregations owned their building. So it was something that could be pointed to that we own and we run, we manage. And so it really was something in the community that pulled people together. It was a point of decency and where people who were really striving to help themselves and to do better. Many things came out of the church that was inspired by the church that came into the community that helped in various aspects of our development of our communities. The AME was huge in the church in Iowa, the earliest churches in Iowa. There was a time in their history after they had split from the large Methodist Church and developed the African American or the African Episcopal Church. The AME in Cedar Rapids, of course, is our oldest African American church. The same is true in Des Moines, well, in just about everywhere in Iowa. The oldest Baptist church was to the south in southern Iowa, and actually was started just before the Methodist church started in Cedar Rapids. But the Methodists planted churches throughout the state. Some are defunct today. We have the cornerstone from one that was in Ottumwa and stood for many, many years. Our president of our board at one time was from the AME Church in Clinton, Iowa, and she later became the mayor of Clinton. So the church was huge for African Americans in Iowa. The church also was involved in Burlington, in southern part, with the Underground Railroad. There were several people that were involved with helping escaping slaves, and for some reason or other, we like to think that they got a lot of help, and they got very little help. And many got discouraged and turned around. Many starved to death. Some lost some children to hunger on the way to escaping. And Iowa was involved in the Underground Railroad, but it's not mentioned much because it went west to east over to the Mississippi River and then on over to Detroit. You may not know, but we border on Missouri, and so we were considered a free state, and Missouri was a slave state. So we had not really a huge amount of people, maybe a couple hundred people during that time that escaped on the Underground Railroad. And we still have, I think it's 5 of those recognized bona fide stations that one is in Des Moines that are still active. In fact, the one just redid the.
What do you mean still active? Still active means like they're still running. What do you mean still active?
They're as a museum.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. No, in 1865 they discontinued, but they have been preserved, I should say.
Okay.
And they have
5. There are 5.
Yes.
All right, I'm gonna type that in the chat. Okay, somebody look this up. Okay.
There's one. The Jordan House is in Des Moines. There's one in Salem, Iowa. I believe there's one in Clinton, and I don't recall the other 2. But we're not known for the Underground Railroad. That's more of the Ohio thing. But
okay, so you said Jordan House in Des Moines, Clinton, and then where's the other one that you know of?
There's another one in Salem, Iowa.
Got it.
Oh, okay. I think there's another in Tabor, 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 Iowa.
Tabor, Iowa. Okay.
which is down toward the state line to the south.
All right. Ground Railroad, which are now museums. All righty.
Yeah, we actually had John Brown, who led the uprising. He came through Iowa recruiting, and a couple of the church members, white church members, joined him, um, and died at that uprising. John Brown.
Oh,
We
wow.
we mentioned that in our history also.
Now, did you you know so much? Did you like help to write the book because you're
I've given I've given a lot of tours of it. One of the reasons I was interested in doing it was because of my ignorance of it, and I wanted to learn. I had this strong, I still have this strong hunger. Roots was tremendous for me. The book Outside In was tremendous for me, and I don't think you can order that book any longer. But if you would like, I can get you a personal copy. So that was part of my learning and wonderful experience
okay.
in learning this stuff.
And I thoroughly appreciate this this sharing. So what you just said really hit a nerve in a good way, and you said that because I'm like, well, you where's your book, right? I want to see your book because
I need someone like you to push me because I've started a couple of times and then I got involved in other church-related activities and other related activities, and I probably have forgotten a lot of it. But
well, if we transcribe this, this is your first draft. How about that?
Sounds good.
So let's I definitely want to shift to again what you just shared about your ignorance, and it has nothing to do with how your mama and daddy raised you. It was the education that was afforded to you, and
yes, available. Yes,
that was available, and you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know what you're not told, and so no one can ever fault people, particularly in this particular situation. Africans who live in America, born and raised in America, who go to schools that are not run by informed and empowered Africans who live in America about the history of Africans before they came to America. Do you understand what I mean?
yes. My source of the history I had was from my mother, who was very proud. Of course, Carver was one of them, but she was very interested in telling us all about Wilma Rudolph and a lot of those, Joe Louis, and of course she came up during the Depression time, and so those were the people. Roy Wilkins was my dad's hero, and was the president of NAACP during the 50s.
Yes.
And so I knew of them, and I knew of the Johnsons. My dad was a distributor for the Jet. And,
okay.
So we had lots of Jets and Ebonies at our house.
Jet, let me put that in the chat because listen, my family was a Jet family every week and an Ebony family every month. Yes. Most people my age, like we remember the Jet magazine, very nicely laid out on the coffee table. Do not touch it until your parents have the opportunity to, go through it, all that.
I got accused of turning to the middle page first.
I didn't want to say that. We all did. We were all like, "Who is that?" This. All right, let's move on. Let's get
that was before I was born again.
Right. Okay. So the level of or the amount of information that we have, and then someone says, "Do you know? Have you heard? Did you see?" And then you're like, I have no clue what you're talking about. That then spurns some people to dig deeper, which definitely you have, and other people they're just like, well, why is it important? And I had that similar type of an epiphany, if you will, or an awakening, if you will, when I was in college as well. And so I remember distinctly. Now I grew up on Roots. You know, I knew who. Uh, let's say like some Tony Brown. Like I used to watch the Tony Brown Journal, right? So
Mm-hmm.
he was my anchor person. Um, but I got to college and was sitting in. I remember specifically. I remember sitting and looking at the professor. I can't remember her name right now. Her first name is Lisa, but anyway, and it was U.S. history, and it must have been something to 1865, whatever that was, something to 1865. And I remember hearing something about, uh, like Africans in America, but let's say participating in maybe World War One or something like that, First War. And I didn't know who these people were. I didn't know. I was dumbfounded, not to be too hard on myself, but I was more astonished at the people who were around me who did not look like me, knew more about these people than I did.
Oh yeah.
And that's when I sort of cowered and I said, this not gonna this can't happen. This
Yeah, right.
and and then I started looking. I started doing the research that I could. Again, like you don't know what to look for because you don't know that it's there. And
Mm-hmm.
then someone, like a semester or a year later, maybe about a semester later, who I met, then just started handing me books and bringing me to lectures and bringing me and meeting some of the people that we would probably be speaking of, who are the proponents and the scholars of African history, African American history, and such. And that's literally when my mind was like, psh, just you know, blowing up day in and day out, if you will. And so here we are as let's say cultural transporters or historical. You're a tour guide. Like that's amazing. That's amazing, amazing. Um,
We did a wonderful exhibit on the Renaissance, back Renaissance, and of course New York was a huge part of that.
yeah,
And so I learned a lot there too, and of course there were so many artists that went to New York to practice their, whether it was poetry or music and just all sorts of acting, and it was amazing, and I learned so much about so many people that I had no idea.
come on back. Come on. I'll try to do my homework and I'll give you a tour the next time you're in New York. All right.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
let's wrap up and go to the I think yeah, like the last part of the museum that we can talk about lightly and or briefly rather. And that was like the sit-in, the counter. I loved that part of the exhibit. Do you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes, yes.
The lunch counter, because I think that that is an image no matter when you were born, where you come from, what you know uh, racial group you're a part of. That image in and of itself, everyone immediately can connect to because it has to do with food. But
Yep.
then, why would it be in the middle of a museum? There has to be some connection to. There's a significance that connects to a have and a not have. Who is it? And most adults will probably are going to know because that's one of the first things that was widely televised and
Yes.
shown and talked about, and you could not ignore it because it was just on
Right.
repeat. So tell us how the significance of the lunch counter in Iowa.
Well, lunch counter in Iowa, believe it or not, the sit-ins at that lunch counter, which was a Cat's drugstore,
Hmm.
that you had to go to the back, and when they weren't waiting on anyone else, then they would wait on you, and then you had to carry your food out. Use it, whether it was an ice cream cone or whatever. It was in a drugstore, um, and so the very first sit-ins that were done there was actually done before the sit-ins in the South and in other parts of the United States. And that blew my mind also. Um, I assumed that they were doing a takeoff from other parts of the country because I remember my dad in Ohio, they were trying to integrate Isley's, which was very similar to Katz. It was, although it wasn't a drugstore, it was an ice cream place. And it was on the way home from church. So we'd walk past Isley's. And if you had a dime, you could stop in and get an ice cream cone, but you had to quietly walk back to the back of the counter. And eventually someone would come and wait on you when everyone else had been helped. If there was anyone else to help, you waited.
So you could be there for half an hour waiting for the ice cream cone.
So my dad and Jim Turner, a guy named Jim Turner, I remember him so well. They went down and did a kind of a sit-in, occupied, and got removed. Jim Turner lost his job. My dad lost his job and couldn't get jobs, And that was in a little town, little Bellefontaine, Ohio, in the north, So these things were going on. In Iowa, yeah, it was done at the Katz store, and many of them they won because they sued the owner of Katz, and they won. They fined the guy a handful of dollars, which I don't know if he ever really paid or not. A lot of things took place through the Supreme Court of Iowa, but was never enforced. And so these things were handed down, and they felt good at the time they were happening. But the guy went right on doing, and so they went right back down there. And so they were in and out. And I think the guy went out of business right after the Civil Rights Act. And so I forget. There's a restaurant located in that building today. It's not Katz Drugstore, but it was very, very central to Iowa's history, a civil rights part of Iowa's history. And so that's why we have it. And we make it so that the kids can come and sit at the counter, and so we have the prices from the 1940s, probably. You could get a sandwich for 10 cents or something like that. Cup of coffee for a nickel.
Right.
But a lot of the kids are learning hands-on what it meant to set at the lunch counter. And of course, it's explained to them why the lunch counter was important and exactly what it did in our history is just as desegregating schools and other businesses, this type of thing, the restaurants and lunch counters were a huge part of the desegregation that eventually took place, but we're still experiencing today as well. I ain't going to mention the name Karen, but we do have an issue in many of our places that we're still experiencing today.
Yeah.
Of course, we have a policing issue here in Iowa, just as you do in other places. But that was a huge part of it. The amazing thing, I think the most amazing thing that has happened in Iowa during the time I've been here, next to the fact that we started a museum and it was well supported. But the next largest thing was President Obama getting his start in Iowa on his campaign.
Yes.
I could not believe how well he was received in places like Dubuque, which we had just prior to his coming, we had cross burnings. We have a lot of rednecks in Iowa that are very proud to call themselves rednecks. And yet he overwhelmingly won Iowa. And I was astonished, and wonderfully astonished. And so, when he was the first time he was running against Hillary, of course she was the favorite and the forerunner of it and everything. And I was amazed at how he beat her out. We have the podium that he used when he came to Iowa.
I saw that.
And it's
That was
it
great.
was originally built in Iowa for Hillary. And the moment she said she didn't want it, he said, I do want it because Hillary doesn't want it. And so it's a wonderful story. The guy gave it to us. And then when he found out it was really valuable, he loaned it to, but we've had it there for some time and he has no intention of selling it.
So,
I'm not even sure who the guy is.
so rejected by Hillary, accepted by Barack, now loved by the person, and they don't want to delete. Go bye.
If you see it in uh, on historical reels and whatnot of his campaigning here, you'll see that podium in the background or where he's speaking at in a number of places. Mm-hmm. So we're very proud to get that.
That's a really great addition. Really great addition. All right, so we're gonna finish up with what I remember as being like the next part of like the end or towards the end of the museum, and that has to do with redlining. Now, we don't have to get deep into redlining, but I know I spent probably about like a good 10 minutes just on this part of the museum in my little, my little tour, my little virtual live stream tour. And at first I wasn't really sure what I was looking at because they were just a lot of these, like political maps and not geographical maps, like political maps of, different zones. I'll call them zones or quarters or just districts. I would call them districts. Yeah. And so I was trying to figure out like, well, what in the world are they doing and what's being talked about? And then there were all of these articles, like newspaper articles of redistricting. There we go, redistricting. Yes. At one point, here's where these people are. But then I guess maybe it was with each census, like every 10 years or so, the lines kind of moved. And so then they morphed across the wall. And then you see the correlation of people of different ethnic groups, and then where these zones were and where the concentration was of income. And literature is my thing. But I sat there and I kept looking back and forth. And I said, wait a minute. Am I seeing what I'm seeing? And then I recognized who was in the areas where the devastation in terms of housing conditions, income, housing costs. Mm-hmm. And I said, wait a minute. It's either around the waterfront or it's around, let's say, the borders of like the major cities. And I said, why does that sound familiar? And one person who was at home, and so again, I live in Brooklyn, who lives in Brooklyn as well, she asked the question, she said, Doriel, are the lines drawn there similar to the lines drawn that we have? And I said, what do you think? It was incredible. Most of the people that had like a higher incomes, they lived, I guess, like towards, let's say, the inland or like in the center. And then people with lower incomes and let's just say more richer melanin lived on the waterfront and around the perimeter. So explain why that became such a big issue that you had to have a certain part of the exhibit that focused on that.
Well, I'll back up a little bit. About 5 years ago, when the new director came in, I retired about 5 years ago, and she took over. she wanted to, and I'm glad she did. She wanted to focus on. We did an exhibit on Black Lives Matter too. She wanted to focus on controversial things that are happening today. We have a permanent exhibit that tells our history, but she wanted to bring to light the background and what's going on today. And of course, housing and real estate, and how realtors have redlined and decided who's going to live where and this type of thing is still with us today. And it was very much with us back when. Now, unfortunately, when you started your tour, you started at the last part of that museum, that exhibit. You really need to walk through and start from the beginning. It makes a little more sense. But when you end the tour of the permanent exhibit, you're at the back of the changing exhibit gallery. And so that's why it kind of a mystifying, if you will, when you first go into it. But the emphasis there was to bring about what was taking place that was keeping African Americans in areas that they wanted us to be in, and out of areas that they didn't want us, unless you had enough money. Today, if you have the money, you can afford to live pretty much anywhere. But I have a friend who he has this white neighbor that he's just having all sorts of issues with, because he has the money to have a house as big as his neighbor, and it's a large house. It probably doesn't cost anywhere near what it would cost in New York, but it's a fairly expensive house here, and so it's still going on today. But if you have, for the most part, in our current situation, what we're seeing more than real estate and housing is more of the vote, watering down our vote by gerrymandering and figuring out how to divide the African American population to weaken the vote, and so your various districts are going to send your people to the electoral college, and so if you can water down the vote in those areas, then the majority of electors coming from your state, they can be controlled, and they're mostly going to be Republican in Iowa, which which means they're going to go to D.C. with a Republican vote. So that we're seeing an awful lot of that today. Gerrymandering is not new, of course, but there's a large push because there's a large fear of white people becoming the minority in our country, which they are. Brown, black, yellow, mostly brown is outnumbering us even as African Americans. It's the growing population, whereas the population in the Republican Party is shrinking. And so there's a great fear, and there's a lot of conspiracy theories that we're trying to take over or something. But in that fear, they're trying to break up the vote as well as the housing. It was important to us because we wanted to bring out some things that wasn't apparent to people who are not suffering under those things, and really are not aware and don't seem to really know about it unless someone like our museum brings it out. Now the newspaper is somewhat bringing it out, but for the most part, most people don't realize, and this is partly why we exist, is to let people know about situations that they really didn't know about, and we've done that a lot, and I'm really thankful that we've had the opportunity to enlighten people on what's going on in our community. Unfortunately, in Iowa, and I don't know how it is in New York, too many of our population is not showing up for city meetings and not showing up for those occasions that the planning.
Right.
We're showing up after it's already planned and built.
And then they argue and they complain.
And then are complaining, yes. When we really had an opportunity during the planning stages. So I don't know if you're experiencing the same thing, but we are actively trying to get our population, African American population, to be aware of these things, because they don't seem to think that's important to them. That's a white thing, and then we end up on the short end of the stick on in some occasions.
I was just going to say that. You're right. We end up on the short end of the stick again, like whining and complaining. And I've said this, had this conversation probably about 5 times in the past 2 months. So we've had some midterm elections. I won't get into all the politics of New York City, but we've had some midterm elections, and I'm sure it happens in Iowa as well. You know, people will come out, let's say, for the the vote to seem to vote for a president, or let's say like your Congress, the senators and what have you. But then like the midterm elections, people are like, well, why is that important? What do I have to do, or what's going on, or who does what? And so we have similar concerns and similar issues. And of course, we're trying to get people, like, just start, of course, on your local level, whether it's your school board meetings. And probably your school board meetings might be a little easier to access than our school board meetings, just because we are such a densely populated community. I'm speaking about New York City and the 5 boroughs of New York City. I'm not speaking about upstate. Upstate is totally different animal.
Yes, it is.
Is a totally different animal. They don't participate in the public school system. But when we speak about just your local school, and then your district, council meetings, and then your your local, what do we call it? I'm trying to just think, like your local political districts. I'm losing my thinking right now. But just to attend those meetings, because as you said, that's where the planning goes on. Mm-hmm. So when we have all these new beautiful buildings that are being built in communities that we're thinking there are no buildings higher than, let's say, 6 floors of apartment buildings. And then you have these, what we're now identifying them as vertical communities, because the buildings are like 30 stories tall. And we're thinking, well, when did that come up? When did that, how did that happen? It happened 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
When you were sitting outside 10 years ago, when you were just, yelling at or arguing about tiny things. And while you were yelling about tiny things, the people were sitting quietly in the back at the meeting that gets posted up on a tree, and you don't read the note on the tree, but it's there. Or it's listed in the newspaper and you don't read the newspaper, but it's there. And you don't go because you think it's someone else's issue. But then here it is. You can't park. The buses and the subways are impacted, and you're whining and complaining.
Yes, I think it's nationwide for the most part. I shouldn't speak for the whole nation, but I know it is here. And
I'm sure if we ask the people who we know from a number of states, I don't think we'd be far off the mark that it's that vastly different. But so I'm really excited to have had this conversation. The last thing I want you to say or to talk about is the structure that is if I'm facing the building, the part of the museum that is to the right of the front door. Tell us about that and why that is so important to that building and to the area.
Well, due to our flood in 2008, we have been taking measures to be able to not have that happen again, mitigation efforts. And so there is a wall that was originally planned to come right through the museum. We talked the Corps of Engineers into going around us. However, the wall takes out our parking lot in the current front. and angles across to the west of us, and then goes along the side of the building, and then angles back over. So they basically go around the museum. So it was decided we just can't have that front entrance where it's at. It doesn't make sense. There's this big ugly wall that's going to be there. So the museum is in a capital campaign right now to redo the building. It will have a lot more, be much more attractive. It'll have more glass and steel. We'll change the entrance to the east side. We are in what we call the Nouveau, or the arts end of town, and what we call a Nouveau. So there are a lot of theaters and restaurants and this type of thing. And we just so happened that we located there before it became that. And so it's come up around us. So we'll actually be facing that, and you'll be able to see our building a little better from there. But the museum will have to shut down for about a year while that work gets done. And so we'll be shutting down probably in the fall, and not coming back up until probably the fall of next year, in time for school to start. And
But
but during that time, we'll have traveling exhibits going throughout the state and throughout the city. And there's a large one planned at the library, Cedar Rapids Main Library. And so we're delighted. The libraries love us because they're always looking for programming and always looking for exhibits and that type of thing. So, and that's throughout the state. So that's what we'll be doing. And the capital campaign is going along real well. Again, this community has opened up their purse strings and have been very supportive. And you have to realize that in Cedar Rapids, we make up about 3.5%, 4% of the population. So that should tell you that this is getting done primarily by white dollars. You want to call it white dollars, the source of. And so the community sees the importance of it. They want us to be here. We participate in the hotel motel tax that gets charged if you stay overnight here. We get those funds that helps draw people to the community. And so the young lady who we started out in a church, we wanted to make sure that we didn't lose that Christian connection. Mm-hmm. And so this young lady that's currently there is a very strong Christian. She and her husband teach Bible classes, but she's very, very good at fundraising and organizing. So I'm just so proud of her. She's taken it to a whole new level. So when we get done next fall, maybe you can do something on the new building.
I guess I'll have to come on back to Iowa and go see the museum again. Thanks so much for the people who are popping on. I see some new faces in the room. So we have been speaking to the co-founder, Mr. Thomas Moore of the African American Museum in Iowa. Let me repeat that, the African American Museum in Iowa. Yes. So I was there again on a visit, visiting some family, and my family said, you have to go to the African American Museum and see the exhibit. And they said it would take 30 minutes. And I was there for over an hour, and I really didn't even focus on everything that was there. Clearly, I would have been there at least for another 2 hours if I really focused and read at least 60% of all the things. I tried to just pan because I was trying to do a little virtual live tour with my social media community. So one thing that I'm also I wanted to highlight, and I thought you were going to mention it, but I'm just going to nudge a little bit more. What I was told is the building of the current structure that is on the right of the front door is an event space.
Let's see the building to the right.
So if I'm looking at the building, there's a it's not part of the museum, but it's an event space. And so my family member, my Uncle Andrew, he said, Doriel, that building to the right is because there were Blacks who wanted to have an event or like a dinner or a celebration or an anniversary and wasn't able to get any space in town to have these big events.
Oh, oh, okay. It is a part of the museum. It's our banquet hall where we also do programming. We have bands and all sorts of things that come that are culturally based. But we also rent it out as a banquet space. Have a number of weddings that get done there.
Right.
It'll hold about 200 people. It was donated by a white couple down in Muscatine, Iowa, and they donated it because they wanted to honor an African American woman who did a lot of civil rights, and she had a little newspaper. She did newsletter, and so she was very instrumental. Aldine Davis was her name.
Aldine
And
Davis.
I
Okay.
never got a chance to meet her. She had passed away before I met them, and they had been to the museum on a couple of occasions after we opened. They're deceased now, but they wanted it dedicated to African American culture and historical things that we would use it for, and they wanted it to be something that we did things free of charge, so we could get as many people in as possible, which we do. We don't charge for our programming, usually covered by a grant, and so we have a young man out of New York that comes quite often, Mr. Ray Blue, the
Okay, Ray Blue from New York.
saxophonist. Yes, he went to school at University of Iowa. He still has two sons here in Cedar Rapids. But that's what that is, and we were very proud of that. When after the flood, one of the city council was holding their meetings there, and also one of the Rotary groups was meeting there, and so it was a very steady income for us until the other establishments got up and going, got cleaned out, and got reestablished. The flood really did us a huge favor, in that we were able to change our exhibit to fit what our need was. What we had imagined was adults coming through, and it wasn't adults at all. It was school kids. So we were able to do a little less about Africa and a little more about Iowa and some more about the United States. And so we transition you from Iowa over to the States and then into Iowa. And so that was something we didn't originally do. We didn't plan on that. And so we were able to do it right the way we needed it.
Right.
We didn't know what we were getting into when we opened the doors. And it was all these school teachers wanting to, because they're ignorant of African American history, they can't teach it, but they wanted their kids to know it.
Right. Well, so that'll be a whole other topic of conversation. I have a segment called teaching and learning outside of the box. Teaching and learning outside of the box, right? So to sort of close the gap on what we know, what we should know, what we're supposed to know about people who make up the, let's just say, a great percentage of this country, and yet do not get the appropriate identification of their contributions to the backbone of this land. So on that note, those people who are still here, we really do appreciate you for staying up until this time. We have been speaking to Brother Thomas Moore, who is one of the co-founders of the African American Museum in Iowa. Once again, I had the pleasure of going and attending. Very, very interesting collections and exhibits. I'm really excited to hear that because your doors, in essence, will be closing, the exhibits will be opening and expanding through the state in schools and in libraries. And if anybody knows any folks who live in Iowa, whether no matter what racial group you're a part of, you really, really need to see some of the exhibits that are going to be traveling over the next year until the new doors open up in, I guess it'll be 2023, 2024.
Now, our website is blackiowa.org.
That's a nice
So
domain name. Blackiowa.org. You can't go wrong with that. Blackiowa.org.
thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the conversation.
You're absolutely welcome. Those people who are watching, if you have shared this out, I really do appreciate you. Please subscribe to the channels that are available so that you can get more of this amazing information and content, and share the information, whether or not you're traveling through, for this particular conversation, traveling through Iowa, or you know somebody who's there and you're like, hey, have you gone to see this, no matter what group they belong to? Please check them out. It's a really, really great wealth of information. No matter if it is only 3 or 4% of the population, they need to know this information. So peace and love. This is a Learn to Grow You moment where I plant seeds, help you grow. And I will see you on the next episode. And you are going to, just like you were surprised about this, you're going to be surprised about the next couple of people that we also have on our show. So I will see you on the next go round. If you have any questions or comments, please drop them in the comments or in the comment section, and we will address them after this segment is over. Have a good day.